when I'm thinking about things, I'm different when I'm thinking about one thing than when I'm thinking about another thing.
You know,
My argument would be, or the basis of my work, which is Self with Others, is that the self only can exist through relationship. The only time I am not in relationship to something, even if that's a relationship to my own thoughts, the only time I'm not in relationship to something is when I'm in non-dream sleep or I'm unconscious, at which point the self actually disappears. I have no sense of self. Self is always relational. So in that sense, self is always the playing of a role. And in that sense, it maps directly onto what an actor does. How do you adopt authentically a role
yeah.
to communicate to a third party?
Okay, so I'm going to jump right in with something that I saw last night that was partially filmed in Ireland, and it's the movie Barry Lyndon by Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I've always meant to.
Oh,
It's decades old now, isn't it? It's whoever the perform. I can't remember who the main performer is in it.
Ryan O'Neill,
That's right.
Marissa Berenson,
Uh-huh.
Patrick McGee. Do you know Patrick
Yeah,
McGee?
yeah, yeah.
Leonard Rossiter
Leonard Rossiter, who was a great comedian.
and Hardy Kruger.
Uh-huh.
And I watched the making of. I've never seen the movie, and thankfully we have algorithms on Google, and they know what things that I may watch, and it landed on my YouTube options. And I've always been a fan of Doctor Strangelove by Stanley Kubrick. I think it's what would I call it? It's one of the masterpieces of all time. I really think it is. And we talk about humor as a way to reach people. And I worked in schools, many of which were challenging. And what the best way I could connect with these students was by acting, by dancing, and using comedy and
Mm-hmm.
silliness, and sometimes seriousness as an undertone of that's not me, so that's the comedy in it. And it was really special. Now you fast forward to the early 1960s, and we have this Cold War going on through the Soviet Union and the Americans have all of their people on their side, and the Soviets forced many of these other countries to be on their side. I'm not sure how many of the citizens of the Soviet bloc were in favor of Khrushchev and the threats that he made, but I'm sure he had many cronies in these Soviet bloc countries that had to say yes to him, and they got benefits monetarily and land and women and other things by saying yes to him. But the Kubrick was sitting around with a gentleman who's English, and you may know him, and they were trying to figure out. They optioned this book. It might have been called The Red Scare or some. There was a book they optioned about the detonation of atomic bombs. It might have even been detonation of hydrogen bombs. I can't remember. And they kept thinking of what they were going to do with this book and how to get the message out that there's this huge problem in the Cold War that we could blow up the world basically. And they got to it got to be early in the morning by the time they were trying all their different types of drama and standard ideas. And they got to be goofy and silly at 2 in the morning or 5 in the morning. And they had to take bathroom breaks and this and that. And they said, you know what? What if the news that there was a threat and that there's this commander from America send his B-52s, or I'm not sure what the bombing planes were with the atomic weapons on them, over the Soviet Union. And what if the news happened when somebody was in the bathroom? Then you've got a comedy, and you could have a dark comedy to go along with it. And they started laughing, and then they came up with all these ideas of these crazy characters, and Dr. Strangelove with Peter Sellers is based on a variety of characters, including this general whose name is Curtis LeMay, who bombed Japan into the dark ages before the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And they said, that's it. And then they got all these great character actors to do it. And then they made the set over in England at this wonderful studio that you're aware of. But the making of Dr. Strangelove, I encourage people to watch, and the making of Barry Lyndon, it's fascinating. I'll let you jump in before I talk about the making of Barry Lyndon.
Well, it's an interesting, the idea that you explore the inexpressible, or that which can't really be spoken of straight. You explore it through comedy or through archetype or through mythology or whatever. It's the driving force behind art, right back, all the way back, as far back as we can trace art and performance. It has been about looking for languages to communicate the inexpressible in ways that the people you are directly talking to can accept and absorb and understand. So, you're talking to people who understand the ways of horses and the weather. You tell stories about horses and the weather. You're talking to people who understand movies or, contemporary hip hop. You work through movies and contemporary hip hop. Artists have always been fundamentally contemporary and also universal. And performers are always playing a specific character or doing concrete things if they're dancers. I mean, dance is concrete. It's actual moves happening live in front of a camera or in front of an audience. There's nothing made up about it. But at the same time, the performer is being universal.